The grand chamber of the Galactic Council fell into complete silence when the ancient being appeared at the center of the room. Ambassador Victoria Grant from Earth watched carefully from her position on the human platform. Her hands gripped the metal railing tightly as surprised voices filled the massive hall. The being was called the Keeper, and it belonged to a race known as the Precursors who had vanished from the galaxy millions of years before anyone could remember. Its body looked like it was made of blue light that kept moving and changing shape. When it began to speak, everyone could hear its voice inside their minds without any sound in the air. The Keeper told everyone that it had watched thousands of civilizations rise and fall across time. It had seen empires that controlled entire galaxies turn to dust and disappear, but in all those millions of years it had never felt the need to come forward and speak until this very moment. High Counselor Zephron, who led the Cortax Dominion, leaned forward in his seat. His body was made of living crystal that reflected all the lights in the chamber. He asked the Keeper what matter was so important that it would break its long silence and appear before them all. The ancient being turned to look directly at the human delegation, where Victoria stood watching. She felt a strange sensation wash over her, like the Keeper could see deep into her soul and understand everything about humanity in that single moment. The Keeper announced that it had come to deliver a warning about the species called humans. It urged the Council with every part of its existence to never provoke Earth or test them or assume they understood what humans were truly capable of doing when pushed too far. A wave of disbelief and mocking laughter spread through the chamber like ripples on water. General Kravax from the Theron Military Command stood up quickly. His 6 arms spread wide in a gesture that showed he dismissed the warning completely. He said that with all respect, the humans were just a young species who had barely left their home system. Their military used primitive weapons that shot metal projectiles, and their ships flew using basic chemical rockets. The Theron forces had conquered species far more advanced than humans. In just a few weeks of fighting, the Keeper's glowing form pulsed with such intensity that several delegates actually stepped backward in their seats. It told them they looked at human technology and only saw how primitive it seemed. They looked at human ships and only saw weakness, but they could not see what the Keeper saw in humanity. They did not understand the fundamental truth about what made humans dangerous to provoke. Counselor Meridia of the Sivari Collective spoke using her telepathic abilities. Her mental voice carried curiosity mixed with doubt. She asked the Keeper to explain what made these humans so special, that an ancient precursor would break millions of years of silence just to warn the Council about them. The Keeper moved through the chamber, and its form passed through solid matter like it was not even there. It stopped in front of a huge view screen that displayed Earth rotating peacefully in space. The planet looked blue and green and beautiful. The Keeper began to explain that humans had evolved on what could only be called a death world. It had studied their planet and their history and their biology for a very long time. The Keeper asked if anyone truly understood what it meant to evolve on a death world. Victoria watched as information began flowing across the view screen. Images showed Earth's dangerous predators and terrible natural disasters and deadly diseases and endless conflicts between human groups. The gathered delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they watched. The Keeper continued explaining that humans came from a world where almost everything could kill them. Their atmosphere contained oxygen, which was actually corrosive to most species in the Council. Their gravity was strong enough to crush visitors from lighter worlds. Their sun bathed them in radiation that would sterilize most other planets. And yet humanity did not just survive on Earth. They thrived and grew and spread across their entire world. The Keeper said humans had developed something very rare in the galaxy, which was persistence. When a human decided on a goal, they would pursue it with a determination that seemed almost insane to other species. Humans called this trait being stubborn. The Keeper called it absolutely terrifying. Captain Douglas Harper, who commanded Earth's newest defense vessel, stood next to Victoria. His face showed no emotion, but she could see tension in his shoulders. Neither of them had expected the Keeper to appear and say these things. The ancient being addressed the Council directly and told them that their species had all developed in stable and peaceful environments. They evolved reason and logic while living in calm meadows and quiet seas, but humans evolved while running from predators and fighting for every bit of food. They adapted to ice ages and massive floods and volcanic winters that blocked out their sun. Humans were survivors by their very nature, and that nature was coded into every cell of their bodies. The Keeper said that survival instinct alone would not be enough to warrant this warning. What truly set humans apart was their capacity for innovation when under extreme pressure. When humans faced an impossible situation, they did not calculate the odds and give up like logical species would. Instead, they found a way to survive. They always found a way no matter how unlikely success seemed. General Kravax laughed with a harsh sound that echoed through the chamber. He said the Keeper was talking about a species that still used chemical rockets to get into space. The Theron forces had mastered fold space travel that could cross the galaxy. Their weapons could crack entire planets apart. He asked what possible threat could humans pose against such power. The Keeper turned its full attention to the Theron general, and the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop suddenly. It pointed out that 300 years ago, humans had just achieved powered flight for the first time. Within only 66 years, they had split the atom and landed on their moon. They went from first flight to space travel in a single human lifetime. The Keeper asked if any species present could claim such incredibly rapid advancement in technology. Nobody answered, and the silence was heavy. The Keeper asked if they knew what humans did when they encountered a problem they could not solve. It explained that humans would break the problem down into smaller pieces and study each piece and understand how it worked, and then they would figure out how to weaponize it. They learned to control fire and used it to forge better weapons. They learned to split atoms and created bombs powerful enough to destroy their entire civilization. The Keeper warned that humans would learn council technology and find ways to use it that nobody had ever imagined possible. Victoria felt both pride and worry at the same time. The Keeper was not wrong about human history. Everything it said was true, but hearing these facts described by an ancient being made her realize how frightening humans must seem to other species, who had never faced the challenges Earth presented. The Keeper continued and said there was another trait worth mentioning. Humans possessed something the council species did not have, which was controlled rage. They could fight with cold calculation while their blood burned with fury inside. Humans called this discipline. The Keeper called it unpredictable and infinitely dangerous. High Counselor Zephyrin stood up, and his crystal body glittered under the lights. He said they appreciated the concern, but humans had shown no hostility toward the council. They had been cooperative and even eager to learn. Surely the Keeper was overestimating the threat. The Keeper replied that it was not speaking about humans as they were today. It spoke about what humans would become when pushed into a corner. The ancient being had seen this potential in their history, and read it in their stories and felt it in their collective unconscious. There was a darkness in humanity that was carefully controlled and channeled into productive purposes, but it was always present beneath the surface, waiting. The Keeper expanded until its form filled the entire chamber with brilliant light. Images flashed across every surface showing human wars and human sacrifice, and human determination in the face of impossible odds. Soldiers held positions against overwhelming enemy force. Scientists worked through endless nights to solve problems everyone said were unsolvable. Ordinary people performed extraordinary acts of courage to save others. The ancient being said humans had named their planet Earth, but they might as well have called it the Forge. That is what their world truly was. A forge that had hammered and shaped them into something unique in the entire galaxy. Something the Council was not prepared to face if it came to conflict. The Keeper began to fade away as its message was complete. But before it vanished entirely, it spoke one final time. It told the Council to treat humans with respect and give them no reason to view the Council as enemies. Because if they provoked Earth and gave humans cause to unleash what they kept carefully restrained, then the Council would learn why the Keeper had come to warn them today. And by the time they understood the warning, it would be far too late to avoid the consequences. The ancient being disappeared completely, leaving the Council chamber in shocked silence that seemed to last forever. Victoria met Captain Harper's eyes across the platform. Neither of them spoke, but both understood perfectly. The galaxy would either heed this warning or it would learn the truth the hard way. 6 months passed after the Keeper delivered its warning to the Council. General Kravax stood in the command center of his massive warship called Retribution. He watched as his entire fleet dropped out of fold space at the very edge of the Sol system where Earth was located. His tactical officer announced that all ships were ready and waiting for orders. Kravax studied the display showing Earth's orbital defenses. He saw primitive space stations and a handful of small patrol ships and one flagship called the Edward Clark. It seemed almost insulting how little resistance the humans had prepared to face his forces. Kravax muttered to his second officer that the council had grown soft over the years. He said they were listening to ghost stories told by ancient beings who should have stayed hidden. These humans needed to be reminded of their proper place in the galactic order. The communications officer reported that they were receiving a transmission from the human flagship. Kravax ordered them to put it through to his screen. Captain Douglas Harper's face appeared on the view screen. The human looked completely calm, but Kravax could see sharp intelligence burning behind those eyes. Harper stated clearly that this was an unprovoked incursion into Earth space. He ordered Kravax to withdraw his fleet immediately. Kravax replied that this was not an incursion but rather a demonstration. The human species needed to understand that membership in the Galactic Council came with responsibilities and a clear hierarchy. He demanded that Harper stand down all defensive systems and allow Theron ships to establish a permanent monitoring presence in the Sol system. Harper's expression did not change at all. He told Kravax very strongly that he should reconsider this action. Humanity did not want conflict, but they would defend their home with everything they had. Kravax laughed at this statement. He asked what the humans would use to defend themselves. Their chemical rockets and primitive projectile weapons would be useless. He gave Harper 10 minutes to comply with his demands, or the Theron fleet would disable all human ships and proceed with their plans. He suggested Harper use that time to convince his superiors to cooperate peacefully. The transmission ended abruptly. Kravax turned to his tactical officer and ordered him to begin combat preparations. He wanted all weapons targeted at the human orbital platforms first. He told them to use minimal force because the goal was to intimidate the humans and not slaughter them unnecessarily. On the bridge of the Edward Clark, Captain Harper stared at the threat board displaying the Theron fleet. He counted 37 warships, including 3 massive dreadnoughts. Against this force, Earth had only 8 small patrol vessels and the Clark itself. The odds were terrible. Harper's communications officer told him that Admiral Lisa Chen was calling from Earth Defense Command. Chen's face appeared on screen and she looked grim. She asked Harper directly for his tactical assessment of the situation. Harper pulled up all the available data and studied it carefully. He told Chen that the Therons were overconfident. Their formation followed standard intimidation doctrine. They spread their ships wide to look impressive, but this left dangerous gaps in their point defense network. Chen asked the only question that mattered. She wanted to know if Earth could win this fight. Harper answered honestly and said they could not win in a straight battle using conventional tactics. But he added that they did not need to win. They only needed to make the Therons regret coming to Earth space. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she informed Harper that the president had authorized all defensive measures. The rules of engagement were simple. Make the Theron fleet leave by whatever means necessary. Harper turned to address his crew after ending the call. Most of them were young and barely out of the academy. But they were human, and that meant something important. Harper had served in Earth's military for 30 years. He had fought in the resource wars and commanded vessels in hostile environments across the solar system. He knew exactly what humans could do when their backs were pushed against a wall. Harper announced to the entire ship that the Theron fleet had given them an ultimatum: surrender or be destroyed. He said he knew what everyone was thinking. They were outnumbered and outgunned and facing technology that was centuries ahead of Earth's capabilities. He paused to let that reality sink into everyone's mind. Then he continued speaking. He told them that the Therons did not know something crucial about humans. Humans were stubborn beyond reason. They were creative when faced with impossible problems, and they absolutely refused to go quietly into the night. The Keeper had warned the Therons not to provoke Earth. They had not listened to that warning. Now it was time to show them exactly why that was a terrible mistake. Harper ordered Lieutenant Foster to bring up something called the Newton package. His weapons officer's eyes went wide with shock. She told him that the Newton package was still experimental. They had never tested it in actual combat conditions. Harper replied that today they would conduct a field test. He ordered her to prepare all kinetic impactors and calculate firing solutions for every capital ship in the Theron formation. The Newton package was humanity's answer to the energy shield problem. Every species in the Galactic Council used advanced shields that could absorb massive amounts of energy from weapons. Human weapons were based on chemical explosives and nuclear reactions. The energy from these weapons was simply absorbed and scattered harmlessly by Council shields. They were completely useless. But humans had asked a very simple question: What would happen if they stopped using energy weapons entirely? The package consisted of long tungsten rods, each the size of a telephone pole. These rods were accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed using powerful magnetic rail systems. There was no warhead and no explosion, just pure mass moving at incredible velocity. The kinetic energy alone would be devastating. Energy shields were not designed to stop physical objects moving that fast because nobody used such primitive weapons anymore. The tactical officer announced that 10 minutes had passed and they had reached the deadline. Harper ordered communications to open a channel to the Theron flagship. Krevax appeared on screen again and his mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. He asked if Harper had come to surrender his forces. Harper replied firmly that he had not. He was giving Krevax one final chance to leave peacefully. Krevax told him he was amusing for a primitive species. Then he said he would show Harper what happened to species that defied the Dominion. The transmission cut off immediately. On the tactical display, the Theron ships began moving forward. Their weapons started powering up and ready lights appeared across the board. Harper spoke quietly to Lieutenant Foster. He told her she could fire when ready. Foster acknowledged and pressed the firing button. The Edward Clark shuddered hard as its railguns discharged. Across the entire system, hidden platforms and ships did exactly the same thing. To the Theron sensors, it looked like the humans were firing primitive kinetic weapons that posed no real threat. They barely worth noting on the threat board. Then the first impactor hit its target. The lead Theron dreadnought's shields activated automatically as they were designed to do. The shields were programmed to absorb and dissipate energy attacks. But the tungsten rod was not energy. It was solid matter moving at thousands of kilometers per second. The shield had no programming to handle it. The rod punched through the energy barrier like it was not even there. It struck the hull and kept going straight through. The kinetic energy transferred instantaneously into the ship's structure. The dreadnought literally tore itself apart from the inside as shockwaves rippled through every deck and corridor. On the Retribution's bridge alarm started shrieking as the lead ship vanished completely from all sensors. Krevax roared and demanded a report on what had just happened. His tactical officer shouted back that the humans had fired some kind of projectile that bypassed their shields completely. Krevax screamed that this was impossible. Their shields could stop anything the humans possessed. Another officer yelled that there was a second impact. Destroyer Squadron 3 was gone and not responding. Krevax watched in absolute horror as his proud fleet began taking casualties. The humans were firing solid projectiles that had somehow been accelerated to impossible velocities. There was nothing his shields could do to stop them. Krevax ordered all ships to take evasive maneuvers and return fire immediately. But the Theron ships were spread out for intimidation and not for real combat. Their energy weapons were designed to overwhelm shields with concentrated fire. These weapons were being dispersed and scattered by the crude but surprisingly effective armor of human ships. The human vessels were small and fast and moved in patterns that seemed random and unpredictable. Captain Harper watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. The Therons were learning exactly what the Keeper had tried to warn them about. Humans did not play by the same rules as other species. When faced with superior technology, they did not try to match it directly. They found the weakness in that technology and exploited it without mercy or hesitation. The tactical officer reported that the Theron flagship was attempting to withdraw from the battle. Harper told him to let them go, but he wanted to make absolutely sure they remembered this day forever. The officer asked what he meant. The Galactic Council chamber had never felt so tense before. Ambassador Victoria Grant stood at the human delegation platform, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes staring at her. Representatives from 300 different species filled the chamber. They whispered and argued with each other, creating a loud mixture of voices that sounded like fear and anger combined together. High Counselor Zephron called the emergency assembly to order. His crystal body pulsed with visible agitation. He announced that this session had been called to address the incident that occurred in the Sol system. He demanded that Ambassador Grant provide a full explanation for the destruction of Theron vessels. Victoria stepped forward with her posture straight and her voice confident. She had practiced this moment many times, knowing it would define humanity's relationship with the entire galaxy. She began by stating the simple facts. The Theron Dominion had entered Earth space without any authorization. They ignored multiple warnings to withdraw peacefully. They threatened military action against humanity's homeworld. Earth defended itself using appropriate force. Nothing more and nothing less than self-defense. General Kravax's voice boomed across the chamber, interrupting her. The Theron general stood with his injured arm held in a medical brace. His mandibles clicked with fury. He shouted that the humans had destroyed 18 warships. They used weapons that could bypass shields completely, weapons they had never declared to the Council as required by regulations. Victoria replied very calmly that they had used kinetic impactors. These were just solid projectiles accelerated to high velocity. The technology was actually older than warp drives. She pointed out that humanity was not required to declare every single weapon system, especially when they had no intention of using them unless provoked by hostile forces. Kravax stepped forward angrily. He said his forces had only come for a simple demonstration of authority. The humans had escalated the situation to lethal force without proper justification. Victoria's eyes became hard as stone. She told him he had brought an entire fleet of warships to their home system. He had threatened their planet directly. He demanded they surrender their sovereignty. What exactly did he expect humans to do? Simply roll over and accept subjugation without resistance? The chamber erupted into complete chaos. Some delegates supported the human position while others demanded harsh sanctions. Counselor Meridia of the Sivari Collective raised her hand high. Her telepathic voice cut through all the noise like a sharp blade through cloth. She commanded everyone to be silent. Then she addressed Victoria directly. She informed everyone that the Sivari had carefully reviewed all sensor logs from the incident. The humans did not fire first. They gave multiple clear warnings. They used only the amount of force necessary to repel the incursion. According to galactic law, their actions were completely justified and legal. Another delegate interrupted and spoke about the weapon technology. He said that kinetic impactors that could bypass shields would change the entire strategic balance of power in the galaxy. This was a serious concern that needed addressing. Victoria asked a simple question in response. Did it really change anything at all? Every species present had access to similar technology. They simply chose not to use it because everyone developed energy shields at the same time in their history. The entire military doctrine of the Council was built around energy weapons attacking energy defenses. Humans came at the problem from a completely different angle because they had to find solutions with limited resources. Victoria pulled up a holographic display that showed humanity's military evolution over centuries. She explained that humans had no shields when they first entered space. They built their ships to withstand physical impacts and intense radiation and extreme environmental conditions. They learned to armor their vessels heavily and make them resilient to damage. When they finally encountered shield technology from other species, they did not abandon their own methods. They adapted and incorporated new ideas into their existing doctrine. An old delegate from the Vex conglomerate spoke up. His three heads nodded in sequence as he talked. He said the human made a very valid point that everyone should consider. The Council had become complacent over thousands of years. They relied completely on a single defensive paradigm without questioning it. Perhaps this incident was a lesson they all needed to learn about the dangers of complacency. Kravax spat back that this lesson had been purchased with Theron blood and lives. That price was too high to pay for a simple lesson. Victoria turned to face him directly without any fear. She reminded Kravax that his forces had killed 372 human civilians during the resource wars, before humanity joined the Council. Humans did not seek revenge for those deaths. They sought peace instead. Kravax had chosen to test that peace. Now he had paid the price for his arrogance and assumptions. High Counselor Zephyron raised his hand to restore order in the chamber. He said the Council would need time to deliberate on appropriate responses to this entire incident. However, he wanted to note that the Keeper's warning now seemed very wise and prescient. He asked Victoria directly if humanity possessed other weapons that the Council should be aware of for security purposes. Victoria considered her response very carefully before speaking. She told him that every species had the capacity for violence built into their nature. What truly mattered was whether they chose to use that capacity or restrain it. Humanity sought peace above all else, but they would not be enslaved or destroyed. If that made them dangerous in the eyes of others, then so be it. She paused for a moment, then decided to answer his question more directly. Yes, humanity did have other defensive systems beyond kinetic impactors. They would not detail these systems publicly. For the same reason, other species did not share their complete military capabilities. Humans hoped they would never need to use them. But they would use every weapon available if forced to defend themselves. The chamber fell into heavy silence. What Victoria had just said was unprecedented. No species had ever openly admitted to keeping military secrets from the Council before. But then again, no species had successfully defended against a Theran fleet using supposedly inferior technology. In the observation gallery high above the main chamber floor, a young researcher named Peter Blake watched everything with growing concern. He worked for the Council's historical archives, studying ancient civilizations and trying to understand why they failed or succeeded. Something about the human response troubled him deeply. After the session ended, he made his way quickly to the Keeper's last known location. The ancient being had vanished completely after delivering its warning months ago, but Peter had spent years studying the precursors. He had learned to recognize the subtle signs they left behind. Peter found what he was looking for in a forgotten section of the Council station. Old data cores were stored here covered in dust. He detected a quantum signature that matched known precursor technology. He activated his portable terminal and began the long process of decrypting the ancient files. What he discovered in those files made his blood run cold with fear. The precursors had not simply vanished from the galaxy as everyone believed. They had left detailed records encrypted and hidden throughout known space. These records contained their observations and their predictions and their warnings about the future. In these records, Peter found extensive references to humanity. The precursors had been watching Earth for millions of years. They observed humanity's evolution and their endless wars and their remarkable achievements. They had reached a disturbing conclusion after all that observation. Humans represented a potential evolutionary pathway that could either save the entire galaxy or destroy it completely. One passage stood out clearly. It said that humans possessed a duality never encountered before. They were capable of profound compassion and terrible violence, often at the same time. They would defend the weak with the same intensity they used to destroy their enemies. They were pack-bonding predators who learned to extend their pack to include other species. But if their pack was threatened, they would burn entire worlds to protect those they considered family. Peter continued reading with shaking hands. The precursors had run probability models spanning billions of different scenarios. In most timelines where humanity was left alone to develop naturally, they became peaceful contributors to galactic civilization. They shared their unique perspective and their innovative thinking. They helped solve problems other species could not. But in timelines where humanity was threatened or enslaved or attacked, the results were absolutely catastrophic. The precursors calculated that a provoked humanity would not simply fight back. They would transform their entire civilization into a focused war machine. They would channel all their innovation and determination toward a single goal: survival at absolutely any cost. The final note in the record was dated just before the Keeper appeared before the Council. It stated clearly that if humanity was provoked within the next galactic cycle, the probability of peaceful resolution was only 12%. The probability of total war was 88%. The galaxy was not prepared in any way for what humanity would become when pushed too far. Peter sat back in his chair with his mind racing through implications. Peter Blake rushed through the corridors of the diplomatic quarter with his heart pounding hard in his chest. He had to reach Ambassador Grant before it was too late. The encrypted message he received just 15 minutes ago confirmed his absolute worst fears. The Council was secretly authorizing a coalition fleet to contain humanity through military force. He turned a corner quickly and almost crashed into two armed guards standing outside the human embassy. Peter told them breathlessly that he needed to speak with Ambassador Grant immediately. This was urgent. Lives depended on delivering his message. The guards looked at each other with uncertain expressions. One of them said the ambassador was currently in a classified briefing. Peter would need to schedule a proper appointment through normal channels. Peter practically shouted that there was no time for normal procedures. He held his terminal toward them desperately. He told them to just inform the ambassador that a researcher had critical information about precursor predictions. She would understand the importance. One guard spoke quietly into his communicator. After a moment, he nodded and told Peter to follow him inside. Victoria was meeting with Captain Harper and several Earth Defense Command officers. They were carefully reviewing intelligence reports about increased military activity throughout Council territories. A guard interrupted the meeting. He said someone was outside claiming to have information about precursor predictions. The person seemed genuinely distressed and insisted it was urgent. Victoria and Harper exchanged meaningful looks. Victoria told the guard to send him in immediately. Peter entered the room and words tumbled out before Victoria could even greet him properly. He told them the council was planning to move against Earth. They were forming a coalition fleet under the false cover of a security initiative. But it was really a containment force. They intended to blockade the Sol system and force humanity to submit to council oversight of all military development. The room fell into shocked silence. Harper was the first person to speak. He asked Peter directly how he knew this information. Peter explained that he worked in the historical archives. His position gave him access to communication networks most people did not even know existed. But more importantly, he had been studying the precursor records carefully. They had predicted all of this. Every single development. Victoria gestured to an empty chair. She told Peter to sit down. Then she asked him to start from the very beginning and explain everything. Peter explained everything he had discovered in the ancient files. The precursor observations of humanity. The detailed probability models. The warnings about what would happen if anyone provoked Earth. When he finished speaking, the humans sat in stunned silence trying to process it all. Victoria said quietly that the precursors had been watching humanity for millions of years, studying them like specimens in a laboratory. Peter corrected her gently. They were not just studying humans. They were trying to understand something they could never achieve themselves. The precursors were not like biological beings. They did not experience emotion the way humans and other species did. They were fascinated by humanity because humans represented something they could never become, the ability to be both logical and passionate, both violent and compassionate, both destructive and creative at the same time. Captain Harper leaned forward intently. He asked about the probability models. What did they predict would happen if the Council tried to contain humanity by force? Peter pulled up the data files on his terminal screen. He said the predictions were not good at all. In 93% of scenarios where humanity faced an existential threat, they would unify completely. They would stop being separate nations. They would become a single war machine focused entirely on survival. Their innovation would accelerate exponentially. Within 1 decade, they would match or exceed Council technology. Within a single generation, they would dominate the entire galaxy. Victoria asked about the other 7% of scenarios. Peter looked down at the floor. He said those scenarios resulted in humanity being destroyed before they could reach that level of power. But those outcomes required overwhelming force applied immediately without hesitation. The Council would need to commit complete genocide. Even then, the probability calculations suggested some humans would survive. Those survivors would eventually return seeking vengeance. Harper summarized grimly. Either humanity gets destroyed, or they become the dominant power in the galaxy. There was no middle ground between those outcomes. Peter said hesitantly that the precursors had found one other possible pathway. If humanity was treated as true equals from the very start, if the Council embraced human differences instead of fearing them. In those scenarios, the probabilities shifted dramatically. Humanity became a stabilizing force in the galaxy. Their innovation helped solve problems other species could not address. Their natural empathy created bridges between cultures. Their stubbornness prevented the galaxy from stagnating. But that pathway required trust. Right now, trust was in very short supply. Harper asked when this coalition fleet would arrive at Earth. Peter replied that they would be there within 2 weeks. The various forces were gathering under the pretense of joint military exercises. But the real target was clearly Earth. Harper stood up and began pacing the room. He said they needed options quickly. Running away was not viable. Earth was humanity's homeworld. They could not just abandon their home. Fighting meant total war with the entire Council. Victoria spoke slowly as an idea formed. She suggested there might be a third option. What if they did not fight or run? What if they showed the Council exactly what the Keeper had tried to warn them about? Harper stopped pacing abruptly. He asked if she wanted to demonstrate their full capabilities. Victoria nodded. Not just demonstrate but overwhelm them with truth. The Council feared what humanity might become in the future. They should show them what humanity already was right now. Not to threaten, but to make them understand that conflict would benefit absolutely no one. One of the Defense Command officers objected. Victoria was talking about revealing their complete hand. Every weapon system. Every capability. That went against every strategic doctrine humanity had developed. Victoria countered that traditional strategic doctrine assumed you wanted to maintain advantages for future conflicts. But humanity did not want future conflicts at all. They wanted lasting peace. Sometimes peace required showing your potential enemy that war would cost too much. Harper understood immediately. He called it the Manhattan Principle. Victoria agreed completely. During the old Cold War, nuclear weapons were developed in total secrecy. But once they were demonstrated, they became a deterrent. Everyone understood their terrible power. Humanity needed to do the same thing, but with everything they possessed. Harper admitted it was risky. If the strategy backfired, they would paint an even bigger target on themselves. Victoria pointed out they already had that target. The question was whether they faced this coalition fleet while keeping secrets, or by telling complete truth. She voted for truth. Harper said they would need approval from Earth's government. This decision was far too important for them to make alone. Victoria ordered someone to get her a secure communication channel to the president. She told them to prepare a full briefing package. They needed to move very fast. Over the next 12 hours, Victoria and Harper worked directly with Earth's leadership. They crafted an unprecedented response, a complete disclosure of humanity's military capabilities. It would be delivered not as a threat, but as a demonstration of mutual assured destruction. They called it the Transparency Initiative. 3 days later, Victoria stood before the Galactic Council once more. This time she was not defending humanity's past actions. She was issuing an invitation to understand humanity completely. She began by telling the Council that humanity was fully aware of the coalition fleet gathering at the edge of their space. They knew its true purpose. They understood the fear that motivated it. She activated a massive holographic display. She told them humans could meet this fleet with overwhelming force. Kinetic impactors were only one weapon in their arsenal. They had many others, but violence would only prove their fears were justified. Instead, humanity offered something completely different. Complete transparency about everything. The display changed to show detailed schematics and test footage and technical data. Victoria explained these were humanity's defensive systems, their offensive capabilities, their current research projects. Everything was being revealed. They were showing it all because they wanted the Council to understand something crucial. Humanity had the power to defend themselves, but they did not want war. The Council watched in absolute stunned silence as humanity's deepest secrets were laid completely bare. Antimatter containment systems that could power weapons of devastating magnitude. Nanotech defensive networks that could rebuild damaged ships in real time. Quantum communication arrays that could coordinate entire fleets across light years instantly. Artificial intelligence systems that could process millions of strategic options every single second. It was not just advanced technology. It was clear evidence of a species that had spent their entire existence preparing for the absolute worst while hoping for the best. Victoria said quietly that now they knew. 5 years had passed since the Transparency Initiative changed everything. The galaxy had transformed in ways nobody could have predicted. The council chamber where it all began now served as a symbol of cooperation instead of regulation. Ambassador Victoria Grant walked through its familiar corridors with a deep sense of quiet satisfaction. She was meeting with Peter Blake, who had become humanity's official liaison to the historical archives. The young researcher had been absolutely instrumental in building understanding between humans and other species. Peter greeted her warmly, using her first name as they had become close friends over the years. He told Victoria he wanted to show her something very special before the ceremony that evening. He led her to a private chamber where a holographic display showed the keeper. The ancient being appeared exactly as it had years ago, with its form shimmering with ethereal light. Peter explained this was a message the keeper had left specifically for humanity. It had been encrypted with a sophisticated time lock. The message would only open after certain conditions were met. The transparency and the peace treaty and the mutual cooperation agreements had all needed to happen first. Victoria watched as the keeper's image began to speak. Its voice resonated with ancient wisdom accumulated over millions of years. The keeper said that if humans were hearing this message, then they had accomplished what the precursor species could never achieve. They had united passion with logic, strength with compassion, innovation with wisdom. They had shown the entire galaxy that being dangerous and being peaceful were not opposites. The keeper explained that its people, the precursors, had been ancient beyond any measure. They possessed knowledge and technology and power that literally shaped galaxies. But they lacked something absolutely essential, the ability to connect with others emotionally. They were eternal observers but never participants. They could predict outcomes with perfect accuracy, but they could not change hearts or minds. That was why the precursors had vanished from physical existence. Not because they were destroyed by enemies, but because they realized they had reached the absolute end of their evolutionary path. They could go no further alone. But in humanity, they saw a completely different path, one where emotion and reason created something far greater than either could achieve separately. The Keeper's image seemed to focus directly on Victoria, as if it could see across time itself. It told humanity they had been forged in fire. Their world had tested them in ways that would have destroyed most other species. But Earth also gave them precious gifts, resilience and creativity and empathy born from shared suffering, the determination to make tomorrow better than today no matter what obstacles appeared. The Keeper said it had warned the Council not to provoke Earth, not because humans would destroy them, though they certainly could have, but because provoking humanity would force them onto a dark path. One where their potential for good would be completely wasted on survival and vengeance. The ancient being was pleased that particular path had been avoided. Now humanity faced a completely different challenge. Not how to survive, but how to thrive. Not how to fight, but how to lead. The galaxy would look to humans for guidance, not because they were the strongest, but because they understood both strength and restraint. The message paused, and Victoria felt tears building in her eyes. The Keeper continued with its final gift. The precursors were not truly gone. They had evolved beyond physical form and beyond the normal constraints of space and time. They watched still, but not as judges. They watched as proud parents watching their children take first steps into a larger universe. The Keeper said Earth was their last hope. Their final experiment in creating something better. Humanity had succeeded beyond their greatest expectations. They should take this responsibility seriously. But they should not let it become a burden. They needed to remember to laugh and love and play. These things that seemed frivolous were actually humanity's greatest strengths. They made humans who they truly were. The Keeper's image began fading away slowly. It told the children of Earth to go forth, show the galaxy what it truly meant to be alive, know that wherever they went and whatever they did, the precursors would be watching with immense pride. The message ended completely, leaving Victoria and Peter in heavy silence. Finally, Peter spoke softly. He said the precursors had called humans their children, an ancient species that could reshape reality itself, looked at humans and saw their successors. Victoria wiped her eyes carefully. She told Peter they had important work to do, a legacy to live up to. That evening, the Council held a grand ceremony marking the 5th anniversary of the Transparency Initiative. Representatives from every single member species attended, including former adversaries. General Kravax had become an unlikely advocate for human-Theron cooperation after everything that happened. Captain Douglas Harper, now promoted to Admiral, stood beside Victoria as she prepared to address the massive assembly. His hair showed more gray than before, but his eyes still carried that determined spark of life. Victoria began by reminding everyone that 5 years ago, they had all stood at the very brink of total war. The Keeper had warned the Council not to provoke Earth. Not because humanity wanted conflict, but because conflict would waste the potential for something far greater, which was true partnership. Today she stood before them not just as a human ambassador. She represented an idea. The idea that differences made everyone stronger, that innovation came from diverse perspectives, that the galaxy was large enough for all species to thrive together in peace. She gestured toward displays around the chamber showing collaborative projects. Human engineers working side by side with Sciverry scientists, Theron military tacticians training alongside Earth Defense Forces, Cortax artists learning from human musicians and teaching their own art. Humanity had shared their technology freely, and other species shared theirs. Humans taught rapid innovation methods and learned the value of long-term planning. Together they had accomplished more in 5 years than any species could achieve alone. High Counselor Zephyrin stood with his crystal body pulsing warm colors. He said Ambassador Grant spoke absolute truth. The Transparency Initiative had been humanity's gift to everyone. It showed that trust was not weakness but strength, that openness was not vulnerability but wisdom. The Council had voted unanimously to establish something called the Institute of Cooperative Innovation. Earth would serve as its headquarters. This institute would coordinate joint research and cultural exchange and strategic planning, for the benefit of all species. The chamber erupted in genuine applause, a sound that would have been completely unthinkable just 5 years earlier. Victoria looked out at the assembled delegates and felt a profound sense of unlimited possibility. After the ceremony ended, she found herself alone on an observation deck. She watched Earth rotating peacefully in the vast distance. Admiral Harper joined her, two old friends sharing a quiet moment together. Victoria said they had actually done it. They changed everything without firing another shot after that first incident. Harper nodded slowly. He said the Keeper had been right to warn the Council. But it was also right to have faith in humanity. Humans could have become galactic conquerors. Instead, they chose to be builders of peace. Victoria asked if he ever wondered what would have happened if things had gone differently. If they had chosen the dark path the precursors predicted in their models. Harper admitted he thought about it every single day. But then he remembered something his grandfather had told him long ago. His grandfather had been a soldier who fought in the last major war before Earth's unification. He said the true measure of a person was not what they were capable of in their worst moments. The measure was what they chose to do in their best moments. Humanity was capable of terrible things. The galaxy had seen that clearly when they defended themselves against the Therans. But humans chose to use that capability as a shield and not as a sword. They chose to prove they could be trusted with power. Victoria smiled genuinely. She said the Keeper had called them children of a death world. But they proved they could be so much more. They became children of hope instead. In the depths of space beyond the perception of any physical beings, the Keeper observed everything with deep satisfaction. The gamble had paid off completely. Humanity had risen to the challenge, not through conquest but through example. Around it, other precursor consciousnesses gathered. Their presence was felt rather than seen. One observed that humans had exceeded all expectations. The Keeper replied that humans always exceeded expectations. That was what made them special. They adapted and they overcame. Most importantly, they remembered why they fought. Not for glory or power, but for the people they loved. Another precursor asked if they should reveal themselves fully, show humanity what they had become. The Keeper considered this question carefully. It decided not yet. Humanity needed to find their own path and make their own choices. The precursors could guide, but they could not lead. That role belonged to humans now. They were the future of this galaxy. A precursor asked what would happen if humanity failed. The Keeper responded with absolute certainty. They would not fail, because humans never gave up. Ever. That was their gift and their burden. They would stumble and make mistake,